So good evening and welcome from New Canaan Library. I'm Anthony Maricola, Manager of Adult Services and Programming, and I hope you're all doing well this evening. We have a wonderful program for you. Tonight we have veteran author and journalist Mark Seal. He's going to discuss his book, Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, the epic story of the making of The Godfather, in which he writes how the making of the film was just as epic as the film itself. Mark Seal is an author and journalist. He joined Vanity Fair as a contributing editor in 2003, covering stories as varied as the Bernie Madoff scandal, Ghislaine Maxwell, Tiger Woods, the fall of Olympian Oscar Pistorius, the making of classic films such as Pulp Fiction, and many more. He has twice been a National Magazine Award finalist. His 2016 Vanity Fair article, The Over the Hill Gang, about a gang of retired thieves who pulled off the biggest jewel heist in the British history, was the basis for the 2018 film King of Thieves, starring Michael Caan. In addition to Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, he is author of the books Wildflower, about the incredible life and brutal murder of Kenyan naturalist and filmmaker Joan Root, and The Man in the Rockefeller Suit, about the serial con artist Clark Rockefeller. Mark, we're extremely delighted to have you this evening. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So you're going to start by reading some of your book. I just want to hold up a picture of it so they can see the. It's always hard with this, but I'll send.
I can hold mine.
Oh, wonderful. We do have it at the library. We have several copies. There's also copies available at Elm Street Books in town, so you can grab your copy there. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
Thank you. So this is the end of chapter 1, and it leads off with Joseph Valachi, who was a mid-level mobster who, seeking a way out of both prison and he was also marked for death, became the first member of the mafia, or the Cosa Nostra, as it was called, to speak not only to federal authorities, but also before a television audience of millions who were riveted by his testimony. So this picks up when he comes before Congress after another series of hearings called the Godfather hearings. Anyway, so in 1963, it was Valachi's turn to come before Congress. At the time, Robert Kennedy, who had been appointed U.S. Attorney General by his brother, the president, was pressuring the FBI to provide the sort of insight into the mob that the feds simply didn't have. If we do not, on a national scale, attack organized criminals with weapons and techniques as effective as their own, Robert Kennedy had warned a few years earlier, they will destroy us. Enter Valachi, a made man desperately seeking a way out. What he told the FBI was borne out by the Bureau's wiretaps of major American mafia figures. It was Valachi who revealed that the secret term Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing, was used by organized crime figures to identify their organization, soon to be known by the singular term mafia. The mob put a hit out on Valachi to prevent him from testifying before Congress, offering $100,000 to anyone who could take him out. But it was too late. In September 1963, millions of Americans tuned in to watch as Valachi testified before a televised congressional hearing on organized crime, spelling out in gripping detail how the mafia was run, how different crime families owned each American city, how resort towns like Las Vegas and Miami were open for any family to operate in, how each family employed the same rigid hierarchy from the lowliest foot soldiers to the capos to, and he used the term, the Godfather. And Valachi, as a trusted soldier, had been one of the mafia's enforcers, taking his orders from the men at the top. I just go out and kill for them, he confessed in his deep, raspy voice, with the television cameras rolling and mobsters across America aching to kill him. You live by the gun and the knife, and you die by the gun and the knife. It was incredible television, a historic moment. Valachi's testimony provided most Americans with their first detailed glimpse into the inner workings of the mafia. The term was born in 19th century Sicily from the adjective mafioso, meaning swagger, boldness, bravado, but its rise was an all-American crime story, one that began when impoverished Sicilians began immigrating to New Orleans in the 19th century. By 1869, the New Orleans Times noted that the city's second district had been overrun by, quote, well-known and notorious Sicilian murderers, counterfeiters, and burglars who, in the last month, have formed a sort of general co-partnership or stock company for the plunder and disturbance of the city. Over the next 100 years, fueled by successive waves of Italian immigrants, the mafia steadily expanded its territory and economic influence, establishing its control over a host of illegal activities, from gambling and prostitution to Prohibition-era alcohol and drugs. But the stark factual account laid out by Bellacci touched on something deeper and more emotional than any Senate hearing could capture. It wasn't about the gruesome hit jobs or secret lingo or vast criminal enterprises. It was mythic in proportion, a story that encompassed the intertwined elements of family and brutality, of loyalty and betrayal, of fathers and sons, of immigration and the American dream. Capturing its essence, its raw and epic power, would seemingly require a storyteller of immense talents, a modern-day Shakespeare, a Homer, or a Virgil, capable of peering into the blackest depths of human nature and drawing forth something vital and real. Yet the man who would ultimately realize the dramatic possibilities inherent in the Senate hearings would turn out to be the unlikeliest of messengers, a dead broke writer who was lying on his couch in his middle-class home in the suburbs of New York, glued to his television set like everyone else. A writer who would claim to have never even met a genuine gangster, but who would create a fictional story so authentic that it seemed real, a saga that would be adopted by the mob as its own, emulating its language and titles and creed, an abject failure who once lay in a gutter, staring up at the night sky and vowing that he would rise above his debts and his disaster of a life and redeem himself as a writer. His name was Mario Gianluigi Puzo.
Oh,
And that's where it all begins.
Oh, that was wonderful. Can you talk to us about the author Mario Puzo and his upbringing? His lifestyle seemed to have a lot of influence on the Godfather novel. In your book,
so Mario Puzo is the great hero of the Godfather. Mario Puzo was a down and out writer with a gambling habit. He loved to eat, he loved his family, but he was in debt, as he would frequently write and say, to bookies and loan sharks, and because of his gambling habit. And he was born and raised in Hell's Kitchen to an Italian-American family. And as he writes, he was the first writer in a long line of he said his parents were illiterate. He grew up poor, and he always dreamed of becoming a writer. But as time went on, he wanted to be a writer of great art, of great literature. And as time went on, his career failed him. He was a great writer and produced wonderful books, but none of them sold. So he would go deeper and deeper into debt. His first novel, I think, earned him an advance of $3,500. His second one earned him an advance of $3,000. So at one point, he decided it was time to give up on writing for art and write for money. And that's when he began writing The Godfather.
Now, when the novel was released, it was extremely successful. I think from what I researched, it was on the bestseller list for 67 weeks and sold over 9 million copies. It got a rave review from the New York Times editor, and Paramount had purchased the film rights. But they didn't actually want to do the film.
They didn't want to do the film. No, because Paramount, as Robert Evans, the head of production, told me for the book, Mario Puzo came to him one day with 100 pages tucked under his arm. And Evans said he knew the look of someone who was broke. And he said, in trouble? And Puzo apparently told Evans, yeah, yes. And he said, how much? And he said, 15,000. He wanted to option the pages. And Robert Evans said, how about 12.5? And then promptly forgot about the whole meeting. He said, well, that story is contested by other people, including Mario Puzo. He said he didn't meet Evans until after he had already sold the pages, optioned the book to Paramount for 12,500. But the story is one of the great stories in the folklore of the Godfather, of the making of the Godfather, which is full of great folklore. I should say one other story before we move on about Mario Puzo. What spurred him on to write The Godfather was one night when he owed money and was deep in debt. He suffered a horrendous gallbladder attack in his home out in the suburbs of New York. He got a taxi, called a taxi, and the taxi drove him into the city. And he directed the taxi to the Veterans Administration Hospital, where as soon as he arrived, he opened the taxi door and the pain intensified so much that he fell out of the cab and landed in a gutter. And he was laying up in the gutter, face up at the sky, in the night sky. And he thought, here I am, a published author, and I'm dying like a dog. And at that point, he said, that's when I decided to become rich and famous. And he went home to a suburban New York, and amid the noise of 5 kids and a family, he set up his manual typewriter and began to dream. And he dreamed up this world of the Corleone family that was richer and wilder and bloodier than anything almost that was happening in real life, except for one thing. The Corleones had what Mario imbued in them was that they were not just gangsters, but they were family men. And that was the magic of The Godfather. And that's what made the novel so successful, and also the movie, when Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo teamed up to write the screenplay, so successful.
Well, you have a quote in your book from Puzo's longtime assistant, Minetta Walgren, and you say she says the Puzos were very strong Italians, especially his mother, who Mario always said was the Godfather.
Yeah, so his mother was this very strong Italian-American mother who loved her kids very much, but she had this strong gift of language, I guess. And so Mario liked to say that many of the lines that Don Corleone said were spoken first by his mother, Some of that also can be disputed, but, the man holding his throat with his hat when he's bleeding, he said that came from his mother, a story that she said, a man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man. He said that maybe I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. In the course of reporting, I was told that was first uttered by a pit boss or a man who ran the casino in Las Vegas, and he was subduing a rowdy customer. And he said, I'm going to make him an offer. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. But a lot of the great lines from The Godfather are from Mario Puzo's mother.
Now, Phyllis asks a good question. She said, did Puzo do research for the book?
Yes, he was an incredible researcher. So Mario Puzo, after he his novels didn't do that well. They did well critically, but not commercially. He took a job as a writer for a pulp fiction company called Magazine Management, and they put out a lot of the pulp fiction magazines of those days. Mario was an incredible researcher, and he could dream up worlds that were wilder than anything in his research. And so for The Godfather, he ordered the transcripts of the Valachi hearings that I've just mentioned, as well as the Kefauver hearings, for I think $10 from the Library of Congress. He wrote. He got a book called The Honored Society, which was about the Sicilian mafia, and so he researched this really carefully, and so he knew this world. He came to know this world very well. But then he fictionalized it because, you know, the Don Corleone is fictionalized from about 2 or 3 or 4 maybe mafia leaders from those days. And there's also similarities in the real mob and some of the fictional things he created. But he elevated it to the extent that the mob, you know, as I wrote, believed it was real, you know, that he had someone on the inside, they thought, helping him. Somebody also said, or Mario wrote, that it was said that he received money as a PR stunt to write this book, which was absolutely not true. Money from the mob, which is not true, obviously, but he was just such an incredible researcher and had such an amazing imagination that he created this world with the research, but elevated it to an extent that it became myth.
Wonderful. So the film rights get purchased for one of the greatest films ever made. The rights get purchased for under $13,000.
Yeah.
Does Paramount finally agrees to take the movie up? Now, how does Francis Ford Coppola get chosen as the director of the film? Is it something he wanted to do?
No.
Was he familiar with the book?
Nobody wanted to do it. So Francis Coppola was the star of his UCLA film class, screenwriting class. He worked for Roger Corman, the B-movie director. But he moved his operations. He was a rising star in Hollywood, and he had done several studio films, but he got tired of the commercialism of Hollywood, and he moved to New York, to San Francisco with his assistant, George Lucas, future director of Star Wars, who was a young guy, and he was Coppola's assistant, and they moved with several others to San Francisco, where he wanted to focus on art, not commerce, not commercial movies, not big studio pictures. But then he needed the same thing that Mario Puzo needed. He needed money. His studio, American Zoetrope, was practically bankrupt, and the sheriff was about to put a chain across the door. And George Lucas encouraged him, when he was offered this book, The Godfather, to take it as a movie. But Coppola did not like the book on first read. He said, "What is this, the Carpetbaggers?" Because Mario Puzo had put a lot of sex and blood, obviously, in the book, and he just said, the audience has moved past these type films, and he didn't want to do it. But Lucas said, "Look, find something in the book you like, do this studio film, and then we can, for the money, and then we can go and do the films we want to do." And so Coppola went to the Mill Valley Public Library and took out books on the mob, just as Mario did. And he found something he liked. And he said that he wanted to turn the book, make the movie about a classic saga of a king and his 3 sons. And so he had found the key to it, just as Mario had found the key to it, in making it about not gangsters, but a family saga. Coppola did too. And the two of them teamed up, and the sparks began to fly.
Wonderful. Now, the casting choices between Coppola, the Paramount executives, and especially Robert Evans, it became really extremely contentious, right? When you watch the movie, you can't even imagine it being played by other actors, but the actors that were chosen by Coppola weren't actually actors that the executives wanted to play these roles, was it?
No, because they were all unknown. So Coppola had envisioned the movie in his head, and he saw the actors he wanted in the major roles. And he called them all to San Francisco for a series of homemade screen tests that were done for pretty cheap. Actually, James Caan would say they were done for the cost of 4 corned beef sandwiches, because they flew to San Francisco, and Coppola's wife, Eleanor, cut their hair, and they put them in costumes, and here they were. Al Pacino as Michael, James Caan as Sonny, Diane Keaton as Kay Adams, and Robert Duvall as Tom Hagen. And he did these screen tests and sent them down to Los Angeles, and they were not greeted with much enthusiasm because these were unknowns, and this was going to be a big picture now. Because of one reason, Mario Puzo's novel, The Godfather, was racing up the bestseller list, and it was like a nationwide frenzy over who was going to play these roles. And everybody wanted to play the roles. Burt Lancaster wanted to buy the project from Paramount and cast himself as the Godfather. Danny Thomas wanted to buy the project from, and he could. He was wealthy because he had all the television shows like the Andy Griffith Show, Andy of Mayberry, and shows like that. And so he could have done it, but so they wanted stars. They wanted, Robert Redford potentially as Michael, or Ryan O'Neal as Michael, who had a hit in Love Story for Paramount. And as far as The Godfather goes, they wanted Ernest Borgnine, who had been in several great, Oscar-winning films, maybe Laurence Olivier, several others that they wanted. But then Mario Puzo, from the beginning, wanted Marlon Brando. And he had written Marlon Brando a letter, and he had, before, when he was working on the screenplay by himself, or shortly after the novel had been published. And you can see a copy of the letter in the book. At the top, Puzo had written his current address. It said North Carolina Fat Farm. And he was at a reducing clinic, and he wrote, "Dear Mr. Brando, I've written a book called The Godfather, and you're the only actor I feel who can play the role with the intensity it deserves." And then the fight was on for Brando, because nobody wanted Brando. Brando was considered washed up at 47.
Yeah, in your article for Vanity Fair, you had written that he was considered box office poison.
Exactly. Yeah, because his last few movies had failed at the box office. He was considered temperamental, late to the set, and he was considered done. But Puzo wanted him, and then Coppola wanted him, and then so Coppola had to fight for him, and Coppola did fight for him because Coppola was really, he would get up before a room, and I was told that it was like a Jedi mind trick. He could just entrance a group of executives, but they still did not want Brando until Coppola insisted that he would. They said, "Well, okay." Finally, he relented. Coppola did like a epilepsy attack on the carpet of the Paramount executives and said, "You've got to let me do this," and they finally relented under 3 conditions. One being that Brando submit to a screen test, which they knew he would never do. Second, that he would put up a bond or some sort. And then there was, then do the movie for practically no money. And so that led to one of the most historic and mysterious 2 tapings in an actor's home, I think, ever. And I can tell you that story if you'd like.
Yeah, please. I mean, it sounded so surreal. They come to Brando's house. He's in a kimono. Please tell the story. It's incredible.
Yeah. So this is a story that Coppola tells, and he, they convinced Brando that, well, by now Brando wants the role because he heard Laurence Olivier might be offering, and he goes, he can't play a mafia Don, Laurence Olivier. So the competition spurred him on. Plus, he had read he knew the book. I don't know if he read the book or had it, whatever. He knew the story, and he was intrigued. So they go up to his house on Mulholland Drive at 7 one morning, and Brando is in a kimono. He comes out in a kimono with his hair in a ponytail. And he's 47 years old. He's still a young man, and he's in good shape. He's not fat. He's in great shape, they said. And he pulls back his hair, and he puts on a coat or a shirt, and puts shoe polish on his upper lip to fashion a mustache, and he puts obviously the Kleenex, the legendary Kleenex, in his cheeks, and says, "I want to talk like a bulldog." And just then, as with the cameras rolling, Coppola had brought different props, prosciutto, maybe some cheese and wine. Brando becomes Don Corleone right there before the cameras. They're like floored, they're astonished, they can't believe that this 47-year-old actor has become this 60-something-year-old Godfather right before the cameras. And so Coppola, instead of going to taking the tape to the people in Los Angeles, takes it to the head of the studio, the man who owned Gulf and Western, Charlie Bluedorn, the man they called Hurricane Charlie, the volcanic immigrant who wanted to turn Paramount into a powerhouse and had hired Robert Evans as his golden boy to do all of this. And so Coppola takes the tape to the Gulf and Western building in Columbus Circle in New York City, and start showing it to Charlie Bluedorn. And Charlie sees Brando. He goes, "No, no, no, I don't want Brando." And then all of a sudden he sees the transformation and he goes, "That's incredible." He couldn't believe it. And everyone else shared the same enthusiasm, and the role went to Brando. Nobody else could have played it like that. But the interesting thing about that tape is that it vanished. It's like Hemingway's letters in the train station in Paris. It vanished. Nobody knows where it is today. I mean, who wouldn't want to see that amazing transformation? But that tape is just in the four winds somewhere.
Paul sent in a question, and he says, "The book presented a fascinating look at how a movie is made: screenwriting, casting, filming, editing, etc. The thing I found interesting is how close Coppola came to getting fired, yet the movie was so spectacular. What was the brass at Paramount so ignorant about what they had?"
Well, in due respect, they several things happened. The dailies would come in, and the Prince of Darkness, Gordon Willis, the cinematographer, had shot this so dark that Peter Bart said, Evans's right-hand brilliant man, Peter Bart, he said the pages first came to him, Mario Puzo's pages, and he was actually the resident intellectual at Paramount who would read these books and scripts, and he said that the footage was so dark that they said, "Are we wearing sunglasses?" And also a vagabond cat had wandered onto the set at Filmway Studio in New York, which was an old place that was apparently had some rodent problems, and the cat was eating the rats, according to the producer Al Ruddy in the studio. And so they couldn't hear Brando's lines because the cat was purring so much into the microphone on his lapel. And Brando, on top of that, was mumbling. And so, in the beginning, everybody was on, shaky ground, because Coppola thought he was going to be fired every day. Al Pacino thought he was going to be fired at any moment, because he felt that his role, the power of his role, was in the transition as Michael from a college boy, military man, into the Godfather. And it all came to bear on that one scene when, in the restaurant, Louis' Italian-American restaurant in the Bronx, Michael Corleone guns down the corrupt police captain McCluskey and the drug-dealing Sollozzo. And after that scene, the Paramount brass knew that this was going to be big, because nobody was going to, even though they thought they were going to be fired, I doubt if anybody was going to be fired after that scene.
Now, Mario Puzo must have been so excited, to have this great cast. Marlon Brando signs on. Was he involved at all in the making of the film?
Well, he was. He co-wrote the screenplay with Francis Coppola, and he would visit the set. one funny story about, two funny stories about Puzo that I love is that after he got the 100, he was given $410,000 for his novel for the paperback rights, and he cashed the check. He went to the bank where the teller had always kind of like groused at him for cashing his overdrafts or trying, to cover his overdrafts, I guess. And he gave him the 100,000 just to see him, see his reaction. And then he went back to the publisher a couple, maybe weeks, months, I don't know what, and said he needed another 100 grand. They said, we already gave you 100 grand just a few weeks ago. He goes, well, 100 grand doesn't last forever. And the other great story about Puzo and Coppola, they would sometimes work on the screenplay in casinos in Reno. I don't know if this is one or two, but Puzo had the great line that he would gamble, downstairs and then go upstairs to write. And he said, I'm losing thousands down here in the casino, but making millions upstairs. So Puzo was there, but at some point he felt like the movie was not his, that he had contributed the script, the novel, the story. They couldn't have, the story was all important. He invented this world, he co-wrote the screenplay, and then he more or less didn't, from that point on, he had done his job, I think.
Carol had writes in, and this was a question that we had. But where did the leave the gun, take the cannoli come from? There's a law that it was actually improvised, and you write about this extensively in the book.
Yeah, so that's the great line. Yeah, one of the great lines in the movie. So it came completely from Richard Castellano, who played the fat but lovable Clemenza. And they were driving Polly Gatto, the turncoat, who was played by Johnny Martino, who's so great. And they were driving him out to that weed-choked field on that barren road in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. And I always thought it was so great because the Statue of Liberty's back is turned to the scene, So at the back of the Statue of Liberty is turned to this murder scene. And so they shoot the turncoat, Polly, and he slumped over the wheel. And Clemenza, Richard Castellano as Clemenza, comes up to the car. And he says a line that was scripted in the script, but not in the book, leave the gun. But then he remembers what his wife told him on the steps that morning, don't forget the cannoli. And so he adds, take the cannoli, leave the gun, take the cannoli. And to me, that line sums up the whole movie, because it's not only about the gun and the gangsters, but it's about the fathers and the sons and the wives and the mothers, which is represented by the cannoli. So it was a complete ad lib by Richard Castellano, who, rest in peace, uttered completely off the cuff one of the greatest movie lines of all time.
Stephen, he sends a question in. I've heard stories that the mafia was very curious about how things were going on the set, and that some of the actors, Carlo Rizzi, Luca Brasi, were affiliated. How truthful is that?
Well, I would say, what happened is the mafia, the Italian-American Civil Rights League that was headed by a man reputed to be one of the heads of one of the five families of New York, Joe Colombo, tried to shut the movie down because Joe Colombo was on a civil rights campaign to stop the stereotyping of Italian-Americans in popular culture. And pretty soon the Godfather became, in their radar, that they wanted to put a stop to it. But it turned out that Al Ruddy met with Joe Colombo and members of the league. He even went to a league meeting, and it turned out that they wanted one thing, and that was the word mafia, which Joe Colombo felt symbolized everything, encapsulated everything about the stereotypings of Italian Americans in popular culture, books, and film, be not used in the film. And Al Ruddy only knew that there was only one point where it was used, and that was when Tom Hagen went to see Jack Woltz, the studio head, on behalf of Johnny Fontaine, and unleashed that string of words, including what was then written in Mafia. And so that by taking that word out, they got cooperation where before a lot of things had been shut down in New York. And so after that, it was rumored that men with connections wanted parts of the film, and it was also rumored that some of them did succeed in that endeavor. Which adds, also you have to realize the wedding scene alone had 750 people in it. So who knows who some of those people were? I mean, I talked to one of the casting directors who's now dearly departed, who cast the extras, and he told stories about getting scenes unfolding in his office as they had in the novel. Like once he got a wrapped fish, dead fish wrapped in newspaper, delivered to his office by one aspiring actor who wanted a part in the film. So yeah, so all of that, is part of the folklore.
In the dedications of your book, you include your wife and mother, but you also write, "And for my father, Bernie Seal, who kept one book by his bedside, The Godfather." Did this have an impact on your writing of this book?
Of course, because I grew up with that book. I would sneak reads of it. I was in 1969. I was not that young, but still, I was a kid still. And so, of course, my father kept that book almost as a Bible. He just loved that book, as everyone else did. And he would quote lines from it at the dinner table and talk about the Tatalias were going to come for us if we didn't behave or whatever. And so, yeah, that was part of our childhood. And when it came to the movie, I was a freshman in college, and I like to say, and it's the truth, I walked in to the movie a kid and I walked out as an adult. I just felt like a new world had opened up to me that I had no idea about, except for reading about it in the book, which I felt equally enthralled by. But the movies just was so spellbinding when you're a kid, in the middle of America, learning about this amazing world, and it's so dramatic and exciting and gripping and real.
Now, what's your favorite scene in the book, and how do you think it compares to in the movie?
Well, there's so many scenes. I think the emblematic scene for me is the opening scene, because it just says so much, because you have this undertaker, and he comes to the Don Corleone on the day of his daughter's wedding, and he says the line that I think the line that says it all. "I believe in America," he says right at the start of the movie. He believes in America. So this is a movie about immigration, about fathers and sons, about the American dream, and these men and women who believe in this so much, and what happens to them and what happens to that belief. So I just love that opening. I think it's so strong, and it so much sets the tone for everything that happens from that point forward in such a motion, riveting, rollicking motion that you can't look away. And what I thought was amazing was that Coppola picked that line, which came much later in Mario Puzo's book, to open his film. And that I thought was just one of the amazing visions that Coppola had, that he was able to see these things that nobody else could see, including that incredible opening.
Mary asks, what do you think about the sequels?
Well, I love them all. I'm looking forward to the 50th anniversary that was just advertised this morning, that they have going to put it out in enhanced formats. And so, yeah, I love the sequels, but my favorite, I'm partial to the first, just because, the sequels were great, but they, without the first is just the original and the masterpiece that paved the way for everything to come. And it changed so much about film. And it's just, to me, that first one is just such a masterpiece from start to finish, that I love watching it every time.
What was your research process like for the book? Did you face any difficulties gaining access to information? Was the process different from some of your previous books?
Well, yeah, it was, because there's been a lot written about The Godfather. Obviously, there's been books, articles, there's been documentaries, there's been there's archives, there's reunions, there's so much written and said, and there's, so my research was reading everything I could and also interviewing as many people as I could, some of whom had not really been interviewed before. A lot of the people had been, of course, and I was lucky to interview some people who have since dearly departed, like Robert Evans, who was head of production at Paramount. During the making of the film, he received me in his home and was very gracious. The screening room where he watched movies had burned down. And so he said we were going to watch the movie in bed or watch parts of the movie in his bed because that's where he watched films with his friends after the loss of his screening room. So I sat there with Robert Evans and watched parts of The Godfather as he told me the story of the making of The Godfather, which was, it's a, once in a lifetime opportunity that I'm so grateful to have had. But everybody was so forthcoming, and everybody has such a love for this film and the majesty of this film that I think people really love talking about it. Francis Ford Coppola was so gracious in answering endless questions, as did the cast, the crew, and a lot of the actors who have since departed, like Al Martino, who played Johnny Fontaine. I was able to meet him for an afternoon in Beverly Hills for the Vanity Fair story that I wrote in 2009. Carmen Caridi, who was an actor who had been slated to play Sonny and had already gone out and celebrated with friends and relatives, and only to find out that he lost the role. I was able to talk to him. So, people were very forthcoming. And so I was blessed in that regard.
Was there anything that stood out in terms of surprises or things that you didn't know going into this research?
Yeah, there were some. Mario Puzo's papers had recently become available at Dartmouth University. I was able to see his own, writing to the IRS, asking for an extension of time. He had a novel that he was working on, and he was asking for more time. I could feel the frustration, the humiliation, as he put it, that he had. I was able to access old articles through an amazing library, the Academy Library in Los Angeles, that helped me by sending me all these old articles about the characters and the making of the movie. I was able to meet with so many people that were just offered some perspective on things that I didn't know, that I was surprised about. So, you go into one of these things hoping that you will discover things. And in this case, I did, although there's been a lot of great things written about it already, including Mario Puzo's own memoirs about the making of the movie, and also an amazing book that I was able to draw upon, written by Coppola's production assistant on the film, which was a virtual diary of the day-to-day making of the movie. And it's a paperback that has the day by day, so you're really a fly on the wall. And also I was able to access a production document that Coppola had hired a court stenographer to transcribe the minutes of a meeting where they went through each frame. He and his artistic team went through each part of the movie, and you can see its creation. So all those were quite surprising and powerful.
Wonderful. So we can open it up to audience questions. So if any of the attendees have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A. Now, let me ask you, what do you think it is about The Godfather that has such longevity? I mean, every time, like you had said, and I watched it recently as preparing for the program, it's as good every time you see it. If not better. It has aged so well.
I think it's two things. I think number one, it was a period piece. In the first, to save money, some wanted to film it in contemporary days. Can you imagine in the 1970s, it would feel so dated, but it was dated when it was made because it was a period piece in the 1940s from day one. So that gives it the feeling of a classic. And the other aspect is that it's about not just the gangsters, but the family. And so it has a heart to it, you know, so you're not just watching, a mafia movie, you're watching the great, as Al Ruddy said, it may be the greatest family movie ever made. And that's what makes it magical. And that's why people watch it at Christmas. That's why people watch it, every year, because, it's a family. You feel like you're part of this family. You feel like you're involved in this family unit where they care so much about each other. And I think that's what gives it its magic and longevity.
So Irene writes, if there can be another story, what would it be?
What you mean about another story about that about the movie, or what?
Irene, if you don't mind just clarifying. Now, I didn't Coppola fight for it to be a period drama. I had read that they wanted to shoot.
It was suggested that it be filmed in present day. I think Mario Puzo's script actually had hippies in it, the first draft. And Coppola fought for it to be shot in the 1940s, as the novel had been set. And also they wanted to do it, there were some that wanted to do it in Kansas City or St. Louis, because New York City was the most expensive place to shoot a film. And Coppola was adamant that it be shot on the streets of New York, and that's when they ran into trouble with the league, as I wrote. So yeah, I think the period aspect of it makes it majestic.
Yeah, I think that backdrop of that post-war New York is perfect.
Yes.
So let me see what Irene says. So she says, if there can be another story, what would it be? A travel into the future. It transcends several generations at this point. So it might be more of a comment, but she's definitely right. Let me see what else we have here. Hold on. No, I read that there were. It says Susan Hewer, who else was considered for the role of Kay?
I have it in the book. I can't recall, but it was a long list of actresses. But Francis Ford Coppola had known Diane Keaton, who was back then, she was really unknown. She was in a television commercial, which was quite successful. And she was on the Johnny Carson show a lot. And she was known as being kooky, was the word that they used. But she had this comedic sense that Coppola felt would bring some lightness to the role. And so she was like perfect. I mean, look, how great was she? And also one thing that surprised me, I was able to interview Gay Talese, the great writer whose wife, Nan Talese, is the great publisher of so many authors, and he told the story about how he went to dinner at at the Pileggi's home. His relative Nick Pileggi, the great screenwriter, and Mario Puzo was there. And Puzo looked at his wife Nan Talese, who was a refined East Coast from an East Coast family who had married into an Italian family. And he believes that that's where Puzo, who was then writing The Godfather, got the idea for Kay. And so anyway, it's another surprising story that I thought was pretty incredible.
Yeah, well. So what's next for you? What are you working on? Anything new? What are your next?
Yeah, I'm always
plans?
working. I'm still a working journalist, writer for Vanity Fair magazine, and so I'm always hard at work on something new. And I wish I could write another book. I mean, do this one all over again. I loved it so much, and every hour spent on it was just so much fun and intriguing, and just it was a labor of great love.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before we started that because of the pandemic, a lot of people were home, so in a way it was easier to get some of those interviews because of that.
Yeah, it was great. People were tremendously gracious and welcoming, and I just wish that it would have been in other times where I could have gone to more of the sites and places which was able to see for the Vanity Fair article, which was entitled The Godfather Wars. I was able to visit a lot of the places back then, and a lot of the places are gone, like Louis' Italian American restaurant, and is now like a yarn store, I think. And so it's been different businesses are there, but a lot of the restaurants are there. You can still go to the bridges, you can go to the house, you can go to different, you can't go to the compound because that was actually a lot of that was made of styrofoam, the walls and the gates and all of that, but you can visit some of the sites.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Anthony. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for all the attendees. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
So long.